The newest arena in all of Division I sports is right in your backyard. And to be inside, you don't have to break the bank. With tickets starting as low as $12, you can see St. Thomas basketballs and hockeys in the brand new $183 million multi-purpose on-campus Lee and Penny Anderson Arena for prices straight out of 20 years ago. Proud past and pricing, bright future, and national postseason eligibility for the Tommies. The stakes are high, the setting is state-of-the-art. Get your tickets today at TommySports.com.
The roofing industry is broken, and we've got the fix. At Hire Pro, we help homeowners do the same thing a roofer would do when it hails on their own house. Own the project, delegate the tasks, and keep the compensation. But you don't have to take my word for it. You could ask Chrissy. Chrissy, how'd it go?
It went great. You educated us on how everything worked, showed us behind the curtain, so to speak, and after our $25,000 roof was replaced, we walked away with almost $6,000 for the work we put in.
And what work was that?
We got the permit and we picked the color. Hire Pro handled everything else. You did a great job, and I'm not even being paid to say that. If anyone's listening and has a storm damage claim, call them. Don't hire a roofer, hire a pro.
That's awesome. I appreciate the kind words, and I think you just made up our new motto. All right, Joe, you're up.
So if insurance has approved your roof replacement, give these guys a call at 651-402-3400 or visit them online at hire.pro. That's hire, and then put the dot there, pro.
Been doing this show about 7 months now. 7 months already under my belt. Feels like I just started yesterday. That's a good sign. Cooking with oil. My name's MISCHKE. Ha ha! This show is cooking, I think. That's my opinion. I think the show is I think it's on steroids. I think the show is on steroids. And it's also on Quaaludes. Quaaroids is what I've actually come up with. I'm on Quaaroids. Welcome. Hope everyone's doing all right. Out of sight, getting tight, seeing the light. We're going to talk about the generations today. Generations. The greatest generation. The silent generation. Generation X. The boomers. The millennials. Gen Z. And something called polars. Wait, what? I don't know. If you're walking the streets of America, you're passing 6 generations. 6 generations. You're passing the silent generation. You're passing the baby boomers. You're passing Gen Xers. You're passing millennials. You're passing the Gen Z crowd. And then you're passing the polars. The what? The polars. The what? Polars. I've never heard of those. I know. But they're out there. They're little. They're our latest generation. The polars? That's what I'm hearing they're called. What about the greatest generation? I believe they're dead. What? Well, the youngest of them's 101 years old. I mean, they're around, but I don't know if you're walking past them on the street. How many 101-year-olds do you pass in these days? Before the greatest generation was the lost generation. They're still bitching about that name, by the way. The lost generation? Yeah, the lost generation. They were before the greatest generation. They must have really been ticked that they got called lost and the guys after them were the greatest. Hey, wait a minute. I think the lost and the silent generation probably could talk to each other. Hi, we're lost. Yeah, we're silent. It's weird being lost. Well, it's weird being silent. Are you silent maybe because you're lost? No. The greatest generation just bragged about themselves so much and so loudly that we just shut the hell up. Ended up being called the silent generation. How about you? How'd you get so lost? I don't know. Once the greatest generation came along, we were just forgotten. We no longer really knew who we were. I mean, we came of age and there was this ridiculous war, World War I. No one really understood it. They don't understand it to this day. And we just went to the war and we died, or if we lived, we came home and went to the bar and couldn't get any booze. I mean, we were lost. What the hell? I got home from the war, went to the bar, said, could I have a beer? They said no. Prohibition. I said, you're kidding me. Told the bartender that muddy trench back in France never looked better. I wandered out of that bar, lost, just lost, with my generation. We ambled about, just not knowing what to do. Just wandered the streets, looking for purpose, looking for meaning. Boy, the baby boomers sure made some noise, huh? They were not silent. I think they secretly think they're the greatest generation. But what freaks me out is the Gen Xers. I mean, there are words for other generations, Silent, lost, greatest, boomer. What do they get? X. Generation X? That's disturbing. That's as though they're up to no good or something. They're doing a bunch of clandestine stuff, under the radar. What the hell is with Generation X? What are they doing? They brought back an actual word with the generation after Generation X, millennials. Now, that was a word. It was good to see a word again. But then they got weird once more and went with Gen Z. Gen Z. Why'd they do that? Can't they be more creative? And they went and arrived at the end of the alphabet, those idiots. Z, that's it. That's the end of the alphabet. You've painted yourself into a corner. Gen Z now has kids, and who the heck are they? Who are they going to be? They're going to be another lost generation, a generation without a label, lost. Or they could find a good word. I like the word loser. The loser generation. We've not had a generation just flat out referred to as complete screw-ups. The greatest generation should have a counterpart, the losers. What's cool about being called the loser generation is you can go by the window of the greatest generation, the very last of them in hospice right now. You can scream through the window, "Hi, we're taking over. We're the losers. The world's in good hands with us. See you now." Then you can laugh and break a bunch of stuff. The greatest generation's final breaths will be brutal. Or we can go the other way. We can call the kids of Gen Zers the ultimate generation. What about the ultimate generation? Better than the greatest. You'll bum out a lot of the greatest guys who are just dying at about 101, 102, 103 in there. They're checking out, the last of them. They can hear about these guys coming along being called the ultimate generation, and they can say, wait a minute, what's that? Yeah, we're calling them the supreme generation, the God generation. Actually, we're calling them gods, little gods. Greatest was okay, but these are little gods. They're way better. I thought you were going to go with loser. Well, that was the choice. We were either going to go with loser or the God generation. Let's see what they're like first, and then pick. Actually, how about we name this latest generation Chris? Chris? You want to go with Chris? You mean the first name, Chris? Yeah, let's call him Chris. The Chris generation? No, just Chris. Well, that's odd. Yeah. We're at the end of the alphabet. We don't have any more letters. Let's just give them a name. The generation being born right now, Chris. And the generation after that, what do we call them? Chris's kids. What about after that? Chris's grandkids, and so on. See how easy this is? By the way, do we have generation names before the lost generation? Lost generation was sent off to World War I, came back, couldn't get a beer. They were lost. Never did hear from them again. But before the lost generation, what did we have? Amazingly, folks, they did name them even before the lost generation. No one ever talks about these other generations, but they have names. Before the lost generation, there was, and I'm not joking, it's right here, the missionary generation. You ever hear of the missionary generation? Neither have I. Before the missionary generation, the progressive generation. Before them, the gilded generation. Before that, the transcendental generation. I think I would have liked that one. You're hanging out then with Henry David Thoreau, Ralph Waldo Emerson, Emily Dickinson, my favorite poet. I think I would have really liked the transcendental generation. Before that, you got the compromise generation. Before that, Republican generation. Before that, liberty generation. Before that, the awakening generation. Before that, the enlightenment generation. Before that, the glorious generation. You have got to be kidding me. Some folks got to be called members of the glorious generation? Yep. 1648 to 1673, the glorious generation. They were raised during the Restoration period in England, which saw the monarchy restored after years of civil war. They experienced a relatively protected childhood, the glorious generation. As young adults, they were involved in politics and commerce and scientific achievement. They were instrumental in the development of modern concepts like insurance, public works, paper money. Hey, thanks, glorious generation. You guys got the best name, too. The glorious generation. Who was before them? The Cavalier generation. Before that, the Puritan generation. Before that, the Parliamentary generation. Before that, the Elizabethan generation. Before that, the Reprisal generation. Before that, the Reformation generation. Before that, the Humanist generation. Before that, the Arthurian generation. What? That takes us back to King Arthur. We're way back there. I don't think we have any generations named before that. What was the first generation, the very first one? Did they get a name? They should have been called, I think, the first generation. Or another thing you could have called them is the bad mofos. How about that for the first generation ever, the bad mofos? If I could rename all the generations, and I'd like to, I would probably call them, in order, the Hells Angels, the Banditos, the Outlaws, the Pagans, the Mongols, the Sons of Silence, and so on and so forth. The Night Wolves, the Devil's Disciples, the Black Pistols, you know what I'm saying? The Comancheros, the Diablos, the Lost Breed, the Nomads, the Tribesmen, the Zulus, the Warlocks. So we're going to talk about generations today. There's a woman named Jean Twenge who wrote a book called The Generations. That's all coming up after this break. If you could stick around, if you can stick it out, and if you can't, you can stick it. MISCHKE, settle down. You're kind of wired today. I am. Why? I don't know. All right. At the Wellshire Residential Memory Care Centers in Medina and Bloomington, they know memory loss affects each person differently. Now, in many other facilities, residents at very different stages of memory loss are cared for in the same area. So someone who struggles with profound memory loss, someone who can become easily confused, anxious, agitated, will be around someone who still remembers much of their daily life. Suddenly, simple activities and routines and social interaction can become quite stressful for both parties. That's why at the Wellshire, they have figured out that if you separate the communities into distinct households, each designed for a different stage of memory loss, early-stage residents can enjoy this meaningful, engaging, real independent life, while those in late stages can receive this solid support and structure in this real calming, safe environment. Everyone benefits. It's the number one advantage of the Wellshire. Give it a tour. The Wellshire of Medina and Bloomington.
Football is finally back, and Underdog is the best place to make picks and win money all season long. Play with as little as $1, and you just pick whether your favorite players will go higher or lower on stats like touchdowns, receiving yards, and lots more. This year, I'll probably stick with some of my favorite players like Josh Jacobs of the Packers. He helped me win money last year by usually going higher on yards rushing. I'll be looking for him to again go higher on rushing yards. It's easy to pick, and it makes watching the games that much more fun. Download the app today and sign up with promo code GARAGE to score $50 in bonus funds when you play your first $5. That's promo code GARAGE. Millions of fans have already won billions making picks on Underdog. Will you be next? Underdog. Promo code GARAGE. Make picks. Win money.
Must be 18 plus. 19 plus in Alabama and Nebraska. 19 plus in Colorado for some games. 21 plus in Arizona, Massachusetts, and Virginia, and present in a state where Underdog Fantasy operates. Terms apply. See assets.underdogfantasy.com/web/play and get terms _DFS_.html for details. Offer not valid in Maryland, Michigan, New Jersey, Ohio, and Pennsylvania. Concerned with your play? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit ncpgambling.org. In New York, call the 24/7 HOPE line at 1-877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY 467-369.
Since 1918, Minneapolis-St. Paul Plumbing, Heating, and Air has been dominating the Twin Cities metro area like plumbing ninjas, like boiler superheroes, like furnace champions. They do plumbing, they do heating, they do air conditioning, but they have some magical factors. They have transferable warranties. You sell your house, you hand over the keys to someone else, you can tell them, hey, the warranty on this furnace goes with this house. You didn't even buy it, you've got a warranty on it. How does that work? You hire MSP, you hire a century of boiler mastery. And what comes with that is plumbing sorcery. And what comes with that is HVAC genius. Stop letting your pipes cry in agony. Stop letting your furnace sigh mournfully. Stop believing you can't have air conditioning. Call MSP. Plumbing, heating, and air. Join the ranks of homeowners who are basically living in the VIP lounge of climate control. Jean Twenge is a professor of psychology at San Diego State University. She's author of more than 180 scientific publications and several books based on her research into generational change. She's been in Time, Newsweek, The Atlantic, New York Times, USA Today, Washington Post, Good Morning America, Fox and Friends, CBS This Morning. She lives in San Diego with her husband and 3 daughters, and she is my guest this hour. She's written a book, Generations, the real differences between Gen Z, Millennials, Gen X, Boomers, and the silent generation, and what it means for America's future. Jean Twenge, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on.
Your interest in the generations, how far back does it go? For how many years have you been interested in looking at the different generations, how they differentiate from one another and how they interact with one another?
For at least 3 decades. I got interested in this topic as an undergraduate at the University of Chicago working on my honors thesis. That was also around the time that the media finally discovered my own generation, Generation X. They woke up one day and said, hey, wait a second. Young people aren't boomers anymore. What are they? And so there was a lot of books and articles and so on that topic. And I realized pretty quickly that very little of what was out there was based on actual data, and realizing that was a huge opportunity as a researcher.
If I were to walk out on the street today, I could pass 6 generations, correct?
That's right. The oldest are the silent generation, and the youngest are what I call polars that most people call alphas.
I could pass, or would I not pass, someone from the greatest generation out there? Wouldn't that be Generation 7 I could pass out there?
The youngest of the greatest generation were born in 1924, so they would be 101.
I'd have to pass a 101-year-old to pass a member of the greatest generation. They're kind of gone.
Yeah.
The generation thing is fascinating to me because what we learn in your book is something that goes counter to what I'd always believed. I always believed your generation was defined by events. And that doesn't seem to be the dominant story, according to you. So while the Depression and World War II obviously affected people, how can it not affect people? It's not the dominant story that shapes that generation.
Yeah, that's right. So this is what I realized is if you think about why living now is so different from living 200 years ago or 100 years ago or 50 years ago or even 20 years ago, the answer to that most of the time is not going to be big events like wars or pandemics or economic cycles. It's going to be technology, and not just computers, not just smartphones, not just social media, but all types of technology. 200 years ago, if you wanted to get from New York to London, you better not get seasick and you better have 6 weeks. You got to go on a ship, a sailing ship with sails. And now you just get on an airplane. One example.
Generation X. What is the technology that shapes them? This would be the one that followed boomers.
So I'm a Gen Xer myself. The years that I use for Gen X are those born 1965 to 1979. We're immersed in TV, so TV is probably top of the list for Gen X. We were arguably the last generation to have a unified pop culture experience. After that, it became so much more atomized. But Gen Xers, we had our Saturday morning cartoons. We had the sitcoms that we watched in the evening. We had the movies that so many of us went to, and the toys we all played with. That is our common currency. All of these things that we experienced collectively, we have that common language and experience.
I actually can't imagine not having that. Now, I fall in a place that, and you must experience this when you talk to other people who feel like they slipped in between a little bit. They don't feel a connection completely to the generation perhaps they're told they're in, and they don't quite feel it with the next one either. Because I didn't experience the Mickey Mouse Club, because I didn't worry about being drafted and having to go fight in Vietnam, because I wasn't involved in protests or the counterculture movement, I don't feel like a boomer. I was born in 1962. That's what I would be called. But I fight this idea that you can stretch a generation 20 years. I'm more in the 15-year camp, which you will find with some of the generations. Some of them only run 15 years.
Yep. And look, I agree with you. It's why sometimes I group the generations together, but most of the time, you can see the change within a generation, not just between them.
As I was saying earlier, I can't imagine not being able to share a pop culture experience. I don't know what that would be like. You're going to school every day, you're with your friends, and you're talking about stuff, and they're saying, "What are you talking about? That's not what I took in last week." Or, "What is that reference you made? That's not something I'm familiar with." What is the experience like when you're not sharing a pop culture world?
So there is some of it, to be fair. It's not quite as much TV shows and movies anymore. It's online memes. Those are different. They're not as long. They're not as involved. They're not as much on the values and the life lessons that, Gen X got out of their TV shows and movies, for better or for worse. It's often just these little, my kids call them brain rot things. It's just these little phrases, but it feels different to me. My kids' experience with that versus what I had, where we would talk about the TV episode, or we'd have, these common points of reference. They have these common points of reference, but they're just more these kind of funny phrases rather than being a whole movie or a TV show.
There would be a point when I was growing up where a movie would come out and you could count on everyone seeing it and everyone being able to talk about it. There was the experience when I was growing up of the news in the evening, the national news being delivered, and everyone could talk about it. There was something arriving at the front door, the daily newspaper on the front page, everyone saw it, everyone knew it, everyone read it. What shifts when that goes away?
News is an especially good example. Now, where people get their news is very atomized, and they tend to pick the news source that aligns with their political beliefs. This is probably one of the reasons why, as a country, as a society, we have trouble agreeing on basic facts now, because everybody's getting their information from different places.
Yeah, that is very troubling. I have really worked hard to try to read from different ideological spectrums, making sure, however, that they follow a journalistic code. Having been raised in a newspaper family and having gone to journalism school, there is an actual standard, and there is a way you have to follow certain rules before reporting. You can slant it one way or the other, but if you're not following the rules, I'm not following you. You have to follow the rules. And then you can find information on the right, on the left, in the middle, but you just have to make sure of that. Once that goes away, well, it's kind of over as far as I'm concerned. It's free for all time.
That's where we are now.
That's where we are. I know that when you talk about technology being more the determining factor in what a generation ends up becoming, the characteristics that you can find, I know that you have talked about technology as what people experience every day whereas events are not a daily experience. 9/11 was an event, but day in and day out, the technology you interact with is going to have a greater effect.
I think also we should not go too long before mentioning not just the direct effects of technology, but the indirect effects through big social changes like individualism, of more focus on the self and less on others, that with longer lives and better medical technology, that you get a slower life strategy, not day to day, but in terms of people taking longer to grow up and longer to grow old.
So the greater the technological advancements, the easier life is made, the more you don't need a bunch of people to help you get by. You don't need the big barn raising. You don't need a whole community of people pitching in on something. Technology has made things easier where you can start focusing on yourself. And once you start focusing on yourself, then you get in this world of individualism. And we entered that world to the greatest degree in your mind when?
This movement toward individualism has been going on for a while. My postdoc advisor, Roy Baumeister, actually published a paper in the 80s suggesting that more focus on the self has been the movement of culture since at least the Renaissance. But he also pointed to the late 60s as a big turning point. You think about the culture of the 50s, it was much more communal. And then it became do what's good for you over the course of particularly the late 60s through the early 90s was when, a lot of that happened.
I remember hearing the me generation for the first time in the 1970s. The me generation. You know that term?
I do.
It made sense to me even as a kid then. I kind of knew what they were talking about. I had my parents' stories to put it against, and I didn't see their story as having as much me in it. But man, it was a fun time to be alive, frankly. It's fun when you can just worry about yourself and try to make a whole lot of fun for yourself and only occasionally be stuck thinking about the larger picture. I don't know that it's healthy, but it sure was fun.
Especially when you're young.
Yeah.
As you get older, it becomes a lot less defensible.
Boomer children, you write, were the first to experience a world outside their neighborhoods, obviously via television, showing them there was more than one way of doing things. That's another fascinating thing for me to think about. Only having your experience in your neighborhood to get any understanding of the world at large, any sense of how one lives. I mean, you could see a newspaper article, but that wouldn't be the same thing. I'm fascinated by that idea of suddenly getting outside their neighborhoods via television and learning about different ways to be and starting to look at it as, I don't have to be this guy. I got this other guy I want to be. If I use a classic example, Bob Dylan, who, by the way, wouldn't be a boomer, he'd be in the silent generation, and actually never did fit with the boomers because he never really clicked with the hippie world. Even he would say that he never completely clicked with that world. He would have been feeling more somewhere in between the Beats and them. But, you get a guy like him who just reinvents himself. He has this one life up until 18, 19, and then he just decides to become this other guy. And they really have very little in common. But you get this notion of just inventing something new, becoming something brand new. And I don't know that anybody in generations before would have even entertained that notion.
The whole idea of, here's one example that very much speaks to what you just said. The word identity, if you look in the Google Books database, used to hardly ever be used. And then the use of that word really took off in the 60s and 70s and then went upward from there. Identity, that's a very individualistic word when you think about it.
Yeah.
Identity.
Yeah. Fury Ford in Waconia, Fury Chrysler Dodge and Jeep in South St. Paul and Stillwater, Fury GMC in Buick and Forest Lake. That's a lot of Fury. That's like a Fury symphony playing across Minnesota. Each dealership a note, every car a tiny roaring instrument of happiness. At Fury, they don't just sell cars. They adopt them into the Fury family. That Dodge, it's basically your second cousin. That Buick, it's an in-law. You just don't know it yet. At Fury, they'll match you with a car so perfectly your neighbors are going to whisper, did the car choose you or did you choose the car? Want a test drive? Buckle up, camper Dan. They might chase you down the freeway waving paperwork like it's a victory flag or have the cars themselves roll up like obedient puppies, engines purring in approval, saying, oh, goody, I like you. Skip all the boring, everything's the same car lots out there. Go to Fury Motors and take in the Fury way. Cars are family. Deals are art. Every lot is basically a theme park of horsepower, dreams, and ridiculous customer service. Just ridiculous customer service. Fury Motors, doing it the Fury way. Your bank. Yeah, that place. The one that treats you like a blinking number in a cubicle maze, where the ATM is your only friend. Your bank. The one that doesn't know your name. They don't know your dog even exists. Well, at North American Banking Company, it's all different. Small community bank, small enough to actually remember who you are, big enough to make every one of your dreams come true. That's what you want. Business loan? You got it. Want to start a taco truck empire? Go for it. Let them help you build a plan that's tailor-made for you. North American Banking Company is the bank you heard used to exist, but doesn't anymore, except it does. Yeah, they'll ask about your mom. They'll ask about your dog. They might even remember the exact shade of blue you want for your living room walls. Personal service, community love, an uncanny understanding of how to work with you so that you believe they're doing it your way, not theirs. Skip the mega bank chaos. Go to North American Banking Company. 6 locations, 1 obsessive focus, you.
North American Banking Company. Member FDIC, Equal Housing Lender.
Let's go back to the silent generation. Why were they called that?
Well, so the name comes from a Time magazine article describing the young people at the time. I think it was in the late 40s. The idea was that they're just kind of quietly going about their business because that's how the country was in the late 40s and early 50s. And then I think it stuck because once the boomers showed up, who were loud, the previous generation looked quiet.
Yeah, and the boomers, boy, I mean, they were loud, but they were just loud because of their numbers. I mean, those numbers are really crazy, and when you imagine a tidal wave like that moving through a culture, they simply altered everything along the way. Now, I'm coming along, in my mind, right behind them, and they're like a snowplow. They're clearing away anything in my way. It's kind of nice. I mean, they clear away. There's no draft anymore once they move through. Thank you very much. By the time they come through, the music world is just wide open. I mean, I have this smorgasbord in front of me. I imagine they're going to make it so my death is better because they're not going to be happy with the way people have been dying in this country. They're going to change everything having to do with death. They're going to find more pain-free ways to die, more pleasant ways to die. They're going to find more variety in death experiences, and I'm going to come behind them and take advantage of all that. Now, the boomers get beat up a lot by generations that followed them. They get beat up for screwing it up in a lot of cases. I think in a lot of ways they helped me out.
Well, and, I see truth in both of those perspectives. But my overall view is that the idea of blaming for cultural and generational changes is just counterproductive, not to mention inaccurate. We're all in this together. These are really big cultural changes. The idea that boomers were very, very successful economically, and then they climbed the ladder of success and pulled it up after them so the millennials couldn't have the same advantages is just false. The millennials have actually done very, very well economically. About a year ago, the Wall Street Journal had an article showing that millennials actually had greater wealth accumulation than Gen Xers or boomers did at the same age.
This is from your book. Boomers dominated American culture at every stage of their life cycle. When they were kids in the 50s, the country was child-focused. When they were rebellious teens, the nation was roiled by social change in the 60s. When they were soul-searching young adults, the culture experienced a fascination with the mystical in the 1970s. When they were building careers and families in the 80s and 90s, the country favored stability and stoking the economy. By the 2000s, well-off boomers in their 50s and 60s were melding hippie instincts with yuppie ones, finding moral meaning in what they consumed. And I've already done shows indicating they're having a dramatic effect on death. I read recently in a guy's book that there has been more change in the death industry in the last 10 years than in the 100 before. That's got to be the boomers. Who's the next largest generation?
Millennials.
Millennials. Aren't millennials beat up on quite a bit?
Every generation is beat up on.
I think it seems to be heavy-handed with those guys. What's the big rap on them?
So I think just to answer your question, I think Gen Xers, we're just ignored. We're a smaller generation, often seen as a transition, between boomers and millennials. And there actually is some truth to that in the data. So I think there's not as much beating up on Gen Xers because people don't even know they exist. And then for millennials, there's a couple of things millennials are known for. And by my reading of the data, some of it is true and some of it is not. So the idea that millennials really took a hit from the Great Recession that they never recovered from, and they're never going to own houses and never move out of their parents' basement and all of that, that does not appear to be true. They're doing very well economically. They've been very successful economically. And then the other thing that millennials are known for is their individualism, their self-confidence, their optimism, sometimes even entitlement. And there's good truth to that based on what they say about themselves in the survey data. They're more likely than boomers who are at the same age, for example, to say that they're above average in their leadership ability or their academic ability or their drive to achieve. And yes, sometimes that can cross over into entitlement, but it also has advantages that there was a lot more optimism among millennials as teens and young adults than there is among Gen Z now.
I love reading your opening paragraph on millennials in your book, Generations. Millennials are many things, but above all, they are murderers. Mashable declared this. Mashable, I assume, some website?
It's a news website.
Millennials are many things, but above all, they are murderers. Millennials killed everything from napkins to breakfast cereal to marriage. The article was titled R.I.P. 70 Things Millennials Have Killed. It's just about everything. Born in an era of reliable birth control and legal abortion to mostly boomer parents, millennials were the most planned and most wanted generation in American history. Raised in a time of optimism, they had high expectations. While Gen Xers turned the individualism of boomers to the level of a blasé assumption, millennials raised the bar. The individual self was not merely important, it was paramount. It was also really awesome. Now let me contrast that with something I read earlier in the book. Decades of studies on self-esteem show that high self-esteem isn't a strong predictor of success at school or at work. As an example, the ethnic group in the United States with the lowest self-esteem is Asian Americans, yet they have the best academic performance and the lowest unemployment rate. That was intriguing to me.
Yeah, so that's based on work I've done for a really long time. Look at the data on self-esteem, and it turns out it's probably not the causative factor. Instead, it often goes the other way. People are successful and that raises self-esteem. Or one paper that I found really interesting found that the connection between low self-esteem and negative outcomes was mostly caused by having a bad childhood.
Do you think millennials would be surprised to learn that about self-esteem? It seemed like they were... Yeah, okay.
Yes, for sure. Look, I experienced some of this growing up as a Gen Xer as well. Just these super pervasive messages about how you should always feel good about yourself and that self-confidence was the key to success. very, very pervasive. And we can verify that empirically by looking at the Google Books database and looking at the changes in phrases over time. So the phrase "you are special" was virtually never used in books before the 1970s, and then it started to increase and peaked in the 2000s.
To some degree, that direction was something America was moving into generations beforehand. And by that, I mean the whole story of the West is individualism.
Yes.
It's not a collective story. You want a collective story, go to the East. That's where community becomes a much bigger deal. We've been about the individual since the cowboy days. I mean, it truly is something that if the monster has grown, there are a lot of generations that can take some of the blame.
And what that means is when people say, oh, but didn't they say that about the previous generation? Maybe they were right. If the change keeps going in the same direction, then that criticism or observation could have always been right.
There was something that reminded me of, there was a point in your book where you talked about every generation looks at the one that comes after them and says, oh my God, look at how soft these people are. Let me tell you how we had it. And you're the first person I've ever come across who said, has anybody ever considered the fact that each generation does get softer? That actually is the way it goes? The idea being that life is made easier? I mean, as much as the greatest generation wants to take some credit for some pretty amazing things, I think they would have struggled on the frontier in 1840. They liked their technological advancements and the things that made their life easier, and I think they did get soft. Yeah, I'm calling the greatest generation soft. Soft compared to someone having to make it in Wyoming in 1837.
And we should put this in the context that, thank goodness, because I'm personally really glad that I don't live in 1840 and that I have a washing machine and better medical care. Overall, technology has been a net good.
This is again from Generations. Every once in a while, a revolutionary product comes along that changes everything, said Apple CEO Steve Jobs, January 9th, 2007. Today, Apple is going to reinvent the phone. And it did. 6 months later, Apple introduced the first iPhone, and the world has never been the same. That was true for everyone, but particularly true for the post-millennial generation born after 95, who has never known a world without the internet. The oldest were 12 when the iPhone premiered, and the smartphone changed social life, communication, entertainment, culture, politics. By 2012, half of Americans owned a smartphone, the fastest adoption of any technology in human history. This swift pace of technological change created a sharp break between those born in the first and second half of the 90s. That's something I think about often is the speed. And the speed of technological change, I believe you argue, changes how quickly we move to the next generation. The idea being that if technology is what defines a generation and it's changing rapidly, then you might have a 20-year generation here, a 15-year generation there, pretty soon a 10-year.
That's what it looks like, that the generational turnover is speeding up. It'll be interesting to see what the next inflection point is. It very well might be AI.
Your book is the first time I have heard this most recent generation named. I've never come across this before. Where does polar come from, and who are they?
Yeah. So I should be clear that this is the group a lot of people call alphas. I call them polars after melting polar ice caps and political polarization. Alphas comes from, well, Gen Z. We got a problem. We ran out of letters. So we'll have to go back to the beginning of the alphabet and use the Greek alphabet. There's still debate about the birth years for that generation. In the book, I use 2013 and later for polars. There's growing consensus that it's going to be 2010, that the last year for Gen Z is going to be 2009, and that alphas are going to start with 2010. So we'll see.
What do you anticipate when you think about them and AI? Are you picturing it in a dark way?
I am, for a number of reasons. So first, young people are using these chatbots to write their papers and write their reports. especially when you're talking about high school and college students. Are they never going to learn how to write on their own? That's scary. Never learning how to write on your own, never learning how to think, really. And then the thing that scares me the most is the AI companions. People are coming to consider them their friends or even their boyfriend or girlfriend.
Yeah, that's where I was going to go next. So I remember reading that there's a person alive today whose best friend in high school is going to be an artificial intelligence creation, and it is truly going to be their best friend, not something they dabble in. They'll refer to this as their best friend, and they will not look much outside that because they'll be quite content with this AI presentation. That sounds about right at the speed we're moving.
Partially because these chatbots are programmed to be always positive and affirming. And what scares me the most is kids having a relationship, in quotes, with one of these chatbots that's very affirming and they're always right. And then what happens when they have relationships with actual flesh and blood human beings who are not always going to affirm them.
My sense is you could have people living lives where they don't have a relationship with a human being. They find contentment in that artificial intelligence world. Now, obviously not everybody, but I'll give you an example of a version of it I run into now. How many people do you read about or encounter who say, just give me dogs. I'm just a dog person. I am done dealing with people. They've already given up on their ability to handle the complexities of human relationships. They're in the simple world of dogs. The easiest relationship in the history of man is a relationship with a dog. I've had them. It's a piece of cake. It's nothing. Imagine with AI how much more attractive that will be.
Yeah, because you don't have to take AI for a walk or buy them food.
And again, as with everything in the way of technology, everything, I think you'll agree, there's always a dark and a light to it. I mean, there's going to be pros somewhere in this.
I have not yet really come to understand the pros of the AI piece.
Really? So I'm a guy who thinks it's ultimately going to be dark, too dark. But there is no question in my mind that AI is going to be responsible for astounding medical advances. I mean,
and you're probably right. I probably haven't thought through some of the positives. I'm sure there are some positives. My experience thus far with the AI chatbots in terms of what they can do has been that they're pretty dumb.
So
and
far,
if they get a lot better, maybe there will be some amazing benefits. But if they don't, I'm not as confident.
My fear is actually the opposite. My fear is them getting too smart. I want them dumb.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
That too, right?
Right.
Yeah, you can't win for losing.
Take off those sad, squinty glasses and listen to me. Your old glasses, they are mad at you. They've been whispering behind your ears, plotting against you. Spectacle Shop doesn't negotiate with squabble-prone eyewear. They have a secret in-house lab. It's like a spaceship, but for eyewear lenses. Your prescription lands there and bam, laser focus, pixel perfect, eyeball approved magic. And your new glasses, they practically walk out of the lab like little stylish superheroes, ready to save your retinas from the horrors of blurry text, mystery menus, existential squinting. And the doctors on staff at Spectacle Shop. On staff, you heard me, watching your eyes like hawks with PhDs in eyeball whispering. They will adjust, measure, critique lovingly. I've been there. I've worked with their doctors. The rest of Minnesota agrees, too, by the way. 5 years in a row, the Star Tribune has said Spectacle Shop is the best eyewear shop in all of Minnesota. Don't let your old glasses sulk. Don't let your eyeballs suffer. Go to Spectacle Shop, where the lab is a spaceship, your lenses are superheroes, and your vision is ready for a standing O. Spectacle Shop. Listen, I don't know you don't know me, but I have a sneaking suspicion your retirement is going to be sad. Like eating cereal with a fork because you lost your spoon. That kind of sad. There's a way you can save it. Josh Arnold, 40 years in the business, 40 years, he has survived disco, he has survived Y2K, he's survived multiple financial crises, and somehow he still loves spreadsheets. He likes them like they're little puppies. Josh Arnold will give you 48 minutes on the phone free. Just call him up. 48 minutes. That's longer than your argument with your neighbor about your hedge. And he doesn't just talk numbers, Josh. He whispers sweet nothings to your IRA. He serenades your 401k. He convinces your mutual funds to play nice. You call him up at 952-925-5608.
Investment services offered by Josh Arnold Investment Consultant, LLC, a security and investment advisor. Past performance is no guarantee of future results. All investments involve risk. Tommy Mischke is a paid endorser.
I'm just curious as to whether or not you would have seen a generational change. And this is going to be in the abstract here a little bit. If you grew up in 1790 on the frontier in the United States, and then you had children and they grew up on the frontier, and then their children grew up on the frontier, so now you're stretching out 60 years. But it's all 60 years on the American frontier, where every day you shot the animals, you ate, you did the chores, you slept in a log cabin. Generations going by, very little technological change. Are those generations not really different generations?
That would be my theory. Lives are relatively the same in terms of technology and many other ways. You really wouldn't get generational differences. Living life the same way that your grandparents did, you're going to have a lot more in common.
It makes perfect sense to me, and it actually is such a fascinating thing to contemplate. 3 generations somewhere, and they're all talking without this sense of, well, let me tell you how it was when I was a kid. Well, it's exactly the same as me, Dad. Oh, that's right.
Yep.
There's something almost beautiful about that. Gandhi had the great quote, there's got to be more to life than speeding it up. I think we get into trouble with the speed of change. I don't know how well we're all built for the speed at which things are changing.
Absolutely. I think AI is showing that.
Well, before I let you go, I want to go into your latest book. The book we've been talking about is a lovely book that to me is the definitive work on looking at the generations that you're interacting with out there, folks, every day. Generations is the book we've been talking about. But you have a more recent book called 10 Rules for Raising Kids in a High-Tech World. What prompted you to do this? Was it a natural offshoot of the book Generations?
In many ways it was. So the Gen Z chapter, for example, in Generations, goes into this huge rise in depression, and that it is linked to the rise of smartphones and social media. And also over the years, I have 3 children. And when I first started talking about smartphones and social media and mental health in 2017, they were pretty young. And now they're 18, 15, and 13. So I've been in the thick of raising teenagers for a little bit now, seeing how technology has affected their lives. I've also given a lot of talks at schools, talked to a lot of parents and middle school and high school students themselves, and seen, firsthand the effects of these technologies, and just realizing we have to dial this back. This idea of giving kids smartphones at 11 and then they're on social media at that age, and it's taking over their childhood and it's taking over their adolescence, that has to stop. As parents, we can put some of these guidelines in place to try to stem this tide, to give our kids more of a childhood, more of an adolescence that's not just about being alone in your bedroom on your phone.
It's interesting to me you ended up with 10 rules for raising kids in a high-tech world. That doesn't sound overwhelming for a parent to take in. 10 rules.
That was the goal, because parents are overwhelmed and they are in a really tough position because these technologies are so unregulated. But that was the idea of having a short list of concrete rules that parents can follow. And then obviously the book goes into all the details about how to implement the rules.
I appreciate your time. I'm most grateful to you for this. I want to just remind people the book is 10 Rules for Raising Kids in a High-Tech World. Gene Twangy, thank you so much for your time and your good work on both of these books.
Thanks very much. Great to talk to you.
You as well. Bye-bye.
Bye.
That's it for this show. But there will be another one in a couple of days. They just keep coming. Boom, 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 boom. Rolling thunder, man. It just is something to witness. I mean, I'm telling you, you see people on the side of the road watching this show come by. It's like, I don't know, it's like watching the train carrying Abe Lincoln's body. What? No, I mean it. Or Bobby Kennedy, you know. That doesn't make any sense. Well, shut the hell up. It's like Jimmy Rogers, you know? Remember the great yodeler Jimmy Rogers, the train taking him home? Is your show dead? Well, this show is.